Welcome back to the A4S Summit, and it's great to have everyone with us again for week 2. Last week, we looked at areas that we really need to find inspiration, some of the issues that we're grappling with, and some of the suggestions for solutions. This week, we're really going to deep dive into actions. And to get us started, I am really pleased to have two really inspirational speakers with us for this first session. Mark Hawkins, CFO of Salesforce, and Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever and now set up Imagine. It's fantastic to have them both with us. I'm going to start by speaking to Mark Hawkins, and we're going to talk about some of the work that Mark, as CFO of Salesforce and indeed co-chair of our US CFO Leadership Network, can bring. So great to have you with us, Mark.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So one of the things that we have been looking at, and as you'll know from the dialogues we've had through the CFO Leadership Network, is it's been a tough year. And I think what we wanted to focus on today is have a look back at the year. Are there some lessons learned? Are there some things that we can take from what has been a really tough time? Some moments of inspiration, some positivity, some areas we can act on as we go forward. And then moving into the whole question of reset. How can we reset the economy for a sustainable future? And then finally spend a little bit of time looking at recovery. What could a sustainable recovery look like? And leave everyone with a few thoughts on that topic. So kicking off, Salesforce has had a really long-standing commitment to sustainable business. Can you just share a little bit about how the challenges of the past year have impacted your approach to ESG?
Certainly, and I just want to say it's just really a pleasure to be a part of A4S and the CFO Leadership Network. I really enjoy that, and the group of people that we've been collaborating with, Jessica, has been tremendous. And by the way, I want to say very helpful as we've been navigating through this COVID crisis and these series of crises together, and learning from each other, from peers in the special capacity we have as CFOs to make a positive difference as it relates to ESG. So I just want to say that at the onset. When I look at this year, and I think about the longstanding commitment we have, we do have one, really since the inception of the company. But this year has been a year where we see the confluence of a number of crises. We have seen the health crises. We've seen the social injustice crises, equality injustice crises. We have a climate crisis in the middle of the backdrop, and an economic crises that people have been navigating through. And I think what's critical is just to understand that you can't have a lasting solution if we don't see the interconnectedness of this, and to work together in an ESG way to have a more resilient economy, I think is really important. To me, at Salesforce, one of the things that we've wanted to do is invest in a more resilient business model, a more resilient approach and framework on how we serve our stakeholders, including our environment, and having real concern for climate change, as well as concern for our people, our community, our shareholders, our customers, our partners, and to take a much broader view. And that's certainly something that has been important. And I would say that I think taking that framework will help us going forward. And it's certainly helped us through this very challenging year. And I think it's a historic moment. I've long believed, and our company has long believed, that business is a great platform for change. And we have the opportunity, both in the area of sustainability and in a broader stakeholder way, to help. And the time is really now, Jessica, to help. And as we look back at this last year, we'll talk more about it, but we really believe values drive value. And our values are, trust, customer success, innovation, and equality, and sustainability. And I can talk a little bit more about this last year, how we've had to act on that even during the most extreme pressures. I'd be glad to talk about that, but it's been important to us to, since the inception, really focus on ESG and make the company more resilient and contribute to a more resilient economy.
Yeah. And I think it would be good to pick up on a few of those themes. So one of the things that I love that phrase, value drives value.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about some of the things that might underpin that? So one of the things that we've really found working with Salesforce is the purpose-led nature of the business. And that's something that has come up clearly before the pandemic. You saw a lot of people focusing on that sense of what it was to be purposeful.
Yeah.
For me, and from the research and work we've done, that whole question of what it is to be purpose-led has really been under the spotlight. Yeah. And some businesses really rose to the challenge. I'd really love to hear more from you of how that can be a real foundation for business success, but importantly, how other businesses really need to adopt that approach, that stakeholder mindset to underpin a sustainable recovery.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And, when I think about being purpose-led, I do think about, values drive value. And I unpack it in real live examples. But at the end of the day, I first like to start with a commentary about, really embracing all of our stakeholders as part of the way we think. And people ask me, okay, break that down for me as a CFO. And I look and stand back and say, let's take it one at a time. If you absolutely do everything you can to contribute to your customer success on one end of the spectrum, and you've seen companies thrive, and you've seen other companies that are very transactional and don't help their customer in the same way, and they don't prosper as much, and people say, I get it. Then you break it down to employee relations, and you have a situation where think of the company that has extraordinary employee relations, and think of the companies that have struggled with employee relations and who endures over time. You stand back and you look at the community, and you look at the community relations, and think of companies that totally embrace the community and those that didn't over history, and how did that work out? And you stand back and you look at the shareholder, and those that embrace the shareholder and those that don't, and how does that work out? But then lastly, look at those that care about sustainability and climate change and being responsible. And think of those that totally have taken the other end of the spectrum and how they've fared in the eyes of society and the eyes of creating value long-term. My thesis is that it's not hard as a CFO to see that you can create generational value by really taking the high road and serving all of your stakeholders. And that has been an incredible part of us being a purpose-led company. But now let me break that down from high level and say, what happens in a crisis? What happens in an extreme situation? Well, let me just, kind of walk you through this last year. We were in January thinking we were, getting ready to start an amazing year, put a budget together, and we're executing. And, by mid-March, late March, early April, we realized we were in a situation like we've never been in our lifetime. Nobody walking the planet. And what do? Well, the first thing we did is safety is number one. We worried for 55,000 employees to keep them safe. We were one of the first major businesses in Northern California and all of Silicon Valley to take our people and take them home to be safe. And they're still home. I'm talking to you from my home because our people are that important to us. So we acted on that. We didn't say, how are we going to run the business to do that? We figured how to run the business after doing that, number one. Number two, we looked around and we realized that there were people in deep, deep need. We immediately infused philanthropy in critical situations around the world, as we have done for 21 years with our 1-1-1 model of giving 1% of our market cap away to philanthropy, 1% of our product away. We support 60,000 NGOs. And we give 1% of our employees' time away to pay them and have them track to give back to society. So values drive value. We're going to act into that even now, even when things are tough. Even when I didn't have this budgeted, we are going to go invest in our community right now. We saw a situation, to get even more practical, where we realized things were moving too slow to protect the medical community. And you may have seen it made world news in late March. We actually used a relationship that we had in China. We took a jumbo jet of over 50 million pieces of protective medical equipment, and we flew it into New York City because the doctors were running without it. We flew it into other parts of the United States, in Detroit, in New Orleans, all up and down California. That was not budgeted, Jessica. That was a decision to go take care of our community, go take care of our people, be a responsible citizen. And we literally, when we were getting clearance to do that, people were thinking like, do you want money for that? We said, you don't understand. We've got the money. We are going to take care of things. We just want the permission to be able to go do this. And we gave it to the organizations that could distribute it fairly. But when you stand back on that as a CFO and say, values drive values, you need to get up in front of the investors and speak to them about, we didn't just spend money, we invested money. We invested money to help our employees work from home productively. We invested money in our society that was under critical duress. We invested in a medical community that was going to serve the rest of us. That is what we did. And so in that respect, that's what I mean by values drive value. And we learned so much about that from our employees. As we navigated through this, we learned how critical mental health is right now. We every week, Jessica, for 55,000 employees, we have a video call. We brought in some of the world's best medical experts, some of the best mindfulness experts, some of the, all the different walks of life to help and support our employees, and lots of stuff with more time than we can describe about really standing by values drive value. And so that's what I mean when I think about ESG. And by the way, employees today, as you called out, it's not just the employees who expect us to do this and be a responsible citizen and a responsible employer. Our investors are expecting that. Our customers are expecting that. Our community is expecting that. So in one way, I feel for CFOs, and you and I have talked a lot about this, the world is changing and the expectations are changing and our opportunity is growing to be responsible in that way. And that's what I mean by that. So it's been quite a year. And the year's not over, but we're incredibly grateful for all that our stakeholders have done to support us, and all we're proud to try to support our stakeholders. So I hope that gives you a little sense of this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great to have some of those really tangible examples of how you can really live those values, and to your point, how acting in that way as an investment is not a cost. And I think that's one of the really key shifts in mindset that can really set that foundation for the future. Picking up on that, and as a CFO, one of the other things that really particularly touched on investors and others is that question of how do you actually measure and make tangible some of those investments. Yeah. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you've approached that question of value creation, what you've learned from actually measuring some of the outcomes that you're trying to work towards, some of the activities that you're doing. Are there any insights that you could share with everyone that really help them to think through, okay, so it's great to have purpose, it's great to take these actions, but how do you really systematize it into the business?
Yeah, I'm going to happily address how do we measure it and how do we think about value creation. One thing, and it kind of bridges from the other point about being purpose-led and also getting into measurement and watching these two things collide. I just want to have a bridging comment, and we'll go right into the measurement. When I talk about values driving value and being purpose-led and how that even gets into our business decisions, I'll share a story with you that's public. We had the governor of Rhode Island in the United States call and ask for help during the critical part of COVID, and said, we need help with contact tracing, manual contact tracing. We need help on a variety of fronts to systematize and actually automate how we can protect our citizens in this crisis right now. And we need it right now. She talks on this video, which is public data, that she called Salesforce, and our CEO didn't ask like, here's the price, what's the revenue? Said, we're in, we'll be there, we'll help you. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. We had people immediately engaged. And in that moment, we all learned together. We used our platform product, which was very easy to convert into something that would meet the need of the governor and to help keep the citizens safe through a variety of different functionalities in a thing called work.com we created in 3 weeks. But the point, Jessica, is that we helped her, and she speaks about it. But here's the thing about values create value. Later on, in a matter of weeks, 36 states in the United States quickly took this on. Why is it that, when we are doing the right thing, all of us in our businesses, all of us in our various roles, we have the opportunity to serve the community, and yet an opportunity surfaces that we never even imagined, and that can come. And so I do think it's a big bridge about, thinking about value creation, not in a narrow way, but in a broader way of how do we serve our stakeholders truly? When that happens well, shareholder value will come too as a CFO. That's what I've seen repeatedly in a pattern. So that's the bridge to measure investments and value creation. You won't be surprised to know, but some of the audience might be surprised to know, when I get into a sustainability review with our company, I do a QBR, a quarterly business review. When people first came to meet with me, I said, I want you to be as rigorous numerically as any part of the business. Go watch a sales review. Go watch an operational review. Go watch a service delivery review. Go watch a customer success review. Go watch a financial review. But when you come in and talk to me as a CFO, I want rigor. I want data. I want targets. I want improvement. Better, never done. Because this is a big opportunity. And when I think about value creation, the first thing is to not lower the bar on measurement, not lower the bar on data, not lower the bar on benchmarking, just the opposite. Because you know what happens to your sustainability team? They thrive. They rise to the challenge. And that's one of the things I want you to know when we think about value creation. For sure, we do. But, the first time, I had to think about, how do we create a VPPA for, putting clean energy into the grid. I wanted to see all the math, all the, comparisons to different analyses. And so we try to be more integrated in the way we look at this. We try to think more holistically on the investment. But for sure, we look completely on that. When we do LEED or green building certified buildings, we try to think all the way around it, all aspects of it, in terms of the employee reaction, the retention reaction, the actual cost of that, the changes in utility bills, the our view on how we're contributing to our society and our community. So there's math, numbers for sure. We embrace, as you know, TCFD and SASB activities in our stakeholder impact report that we publish and have Ernst & Young audit. We put TCFD in our SEC filings. We want to be accountable and to measure and to think more broadly. So that's the way I think about it. And we created a product called Sustainability Cloud to do carbon measurement. And when we came there, we needed to think about what would this do for the customer? Would this contribute to their success? And if so, what can we do to support you? But it's the same train of thought, I guess, is my biggest point. I hope that gives some context.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things you said there makes me also think about the broader question of ambitions.
Yeah.
And Salesforce, along with many others from the CFO community and the broader community we work with, have been setting ambitious targets, ambitious goals. And something you said there really captures that of those goals, that level of ambition that we know that we need to have to tackle not just some of the social issues that you've touched on, but also the environmental issues. And in your introductory comments, you touched on climate as well. Could you say a little bit more about the level of ambition that we all need to set, and how working collaboratively we can achieve some of those very ambitious goals?
I 100% think we should think big. I think the biggest challenge is to not think big enough and to not stretch human ingenuity enough to go solve the problems of our lifetime, the problems of our generation. And I was forever grateful I had a chance to host Ban Ki-moon for a lunch. And whenever I meet people, Jessica, I want to learn from people. I want to learn things that I've never experienced. And I asked them, like, if there's one thing you could help me as I think about trying to contribute to sustainability and doing my part in society, what word of wisdom would you give me? And he was very quick and very gracious. He said, Mark, it's all about mindset. When humanity focuses on a topic and gets the right mindset, human ingenuity kicks in and we're unstoppable. And I agree. And I think in the area of sustainability, there's a mindset, and I think you're getting to it, is that we're not stretching big enough. We at Salesforce, we're at zero greenhouse gases emissions. We are committed to 100% renewable. We'll be there in 2022. We've already made the investments to make that happen. It just has to fully actualize. We have made public statements about increasing our diversity. And we've made progress. We got more progress to go, but we're making statements to be there. We made commitments to equal pay. We came out and made equal pay. In fact, when we were all together one time in London, I was tapping in 60 Minutes is a famous show in the United States, talking about how Salesforce took equal pay head on, and we were on briefly. And Mark Benioff, our founder, was on more extensively. But in equal pay, we found that women, we did a self-study, were not getting equal pay for equal jobs. And we absolutely, that wasn't budgeted. We immediately tackled that. And then what happens and many times I should say, when we've done M&A in the past, we do the study again, and guess what we find? The need to have gender pay. So I think the mindset of we're committed to gender pay equality, we're committed to raise our diversity, we're committed to zero greenhouse gases, we're committed to renewable energy, we're signing the business roundtable commitments on stakeholder management. We're looking to use our voice and to use our influence and really try to weigh in and make a difference and share at least what we've learned, but not just learn. And Jessica, you and I have talked a lot about this. My thought for all of us is to first understand problems always, but then activate and then do something. Every one of us has the power to do something, big or small, that adds to this benefit. And I think as a CFO, Jessica, you and I have talked a lot about that. We are in positions of influence. Don't look now. All of us on this call are, pillars of society in our own way in our communities. Our voices matter, and we need to help in sustainability. We need to help in the other ESG crises that are out there. And it's not okay to just admire the problem and not do something. That is my challenge to myself, and that's my challenge to all of us, because I think it's amazing when you get the flywheel of progress. It really you can get incredible momentum with your company. Your company can be a beacon of an example for others, and yet we always focus on better, never done. Nobody's got this finish. That there is no finish line here, but I think there's a powerful opportunity, and I just want to say to you, the A4S team has certainly been inspirational to me. HRH, Prince Charles's leadership for over 40 years on this topic, he's right. And I think it's up to us to all do our own part to act on this.
Fantastic. I'm almost tempted to leave it there, Mark, because I think that was such a great place to leave everyone. But I think we've got time for one more question.
Please.
And so what I would like to ask you is, I guess it's a two-sided question. So firstly, if there are a couple of really tangible actions that you want to throw out to people to take, you've said using your own influence, starting with actions that people can do themselves, but not stopping there. If there are one or two things on climate, on other social environmental issues, what would your ask be or call out? And then secondly, what really gives you hope and inspiration for the future? What keeps you hopeful that we will achieve a sustainable world?
Yeah. I would love to talk about both of those. And I would say a couple things. The first thing I would encourage everybody to do is to go back and I'm going to talk about in the business context. Certainly there's individual context as well, but in a business context, I so agree with the point that Ban Ki-moon made about mindset. Then the question is, where does mindset come from? And it comes from leadership, and it comes from values, and values do drive value. And by the way, we can see ESG strong companies perform better overall. What I would encourage everybody to seriously look at is think about your stated values as a company, and think about where climate change fits in and ESG fits in, because your employees are looking, your customers are looking, your shareholders are looking, your partners are looking, your society is looking, the planet is looking. And it's an opportunity to leverage in a way. The response, I think, will be stunning. I've shared with some folks, I'm the executive sponsor for what we at Salesforce, a group we call Earth Force. I have over 9,000 employees who volunteer all over the world to make us a more sustainable company and to make their communities a more sustainable community. They want to give back. And we're striking a chord of something that is very real. And so my first ask of consideration is challenge your current stated values. The second thing I would say is don't walk away and not think about how you make progress with greenhouse gases emissions, not, think about how you can be more renewable with energy, and really think about those three things alone, I think would really be the beginning of a dialogue and factor this into your goals for the coming years. I think that would begin a flywheel of progress that you would never regret, number one. And then when I come back to, hope and inspiration of a sustainable world, I am a student of history. I love history as an aside, even though my occupation is a CFO, obviously, and patterns. And I am amazed about the human spirit and the human ingenuity that has solved problems unimaginable. And every problem looks impossible until it's possible to solve it. And I would just, again, think about it in a moonshot way of what we can do together as a humanity to organize ourselves and raise the expectations for our civil society leaders, our business leaders, and our educators to raise the game now and help us. And this is not anything but something that we could really rally around over the long term in a very sensible and thoughtful way. And in my bet is that human ingenuity and the human spirit has prevailed in the end through challenges, of generations. And I think about that. And I also am very impressed with the millennials and the earlier generations, where I think their expectations for change are more dramatic. And I think the tone of change is coming, and we just don't want business leaders or civil society leaders or political leaders to be tone deaf. I really think that there's a great opportunity here. It's hard to imagine that having a more beautiful and sustainable planet is anything but a good outcome. in my opinion. So I'll leave it at that. By the way, Jessica, I'm a pragmatist optimist, and that's always served me well. And I think that's a practical suggestion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for sharing all of those great insights and getting us started for today's session and week 2. So thank you very much.
And I really appreciate the opportunity, and be well during the holidays. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.
For our next speaker in today's session, I am really pleased to welcome Paul Polman. Now, he is someone who needs no introduction. I'm sure you all know the leading work that he did when he was former CEO of Unilever and now in his capacity as founder of Imagine. So welcome, Paul. Really looking forward to having you on this session, looking at how we can inspire action.
Likewise, thanks for having me in this important year and important lessons we've had. But first of all, congratulations on the 15 years or 16 years it is now on Accounting for Sustainability. A great initiative, once more, one of many of the Prince of Wales, which I fully support, obviously.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. And certainly we've done a lot of work with Unilever and with you. And I think your background also as somebody very heavily involved in CIMA and that accounting finance world, I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections. So maybe to get going, if we could start by looking at the last year and the response to the pandemic. I'd love to hear from you what might have inspired you in the way that business and finance have responded to the pandemic. It's been a tough year, but is there anything that you've really taken away that has helped to inspire you?
No, for sure. And before I answer that question, just a little anecdote on CIMA, which is now celebrated last year its 100-year existence. And I'm fortunate to be an honorary member, but it started actually with Lord Lever. He was buying so many companies at the beginning of the century, and he just simply couldn't compare it. And he said, why don't we create an accounting profession that allows us to have some standards and comparability, materiality. And we'll talk about that later in light of COVID, how important that is for some of the other measures that we now have to put in place. But this is really the origin of CIMA. No, it's very clear that COVID has shown us that we cannot have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. For the first time, more people are aware of the relationships between biodiversity, climate, human health, social equality or inequality, and obviously the economy. COVID has also shown us, not surprisingly, that although multilateralism is absent right now, unfortunately, many countries shrank back to their own territories, but we've seen an incredible outpouring of partnerships and support from the private sector, which have connected very quickly to save their supply chains, to be sure that they had the continuity of business, but more importantly, to form incredible partnerships to save lives with PPE material. And this is continuing to date. And then the final learning, I would say, from COVID is that companies that were running their businesses on a long-term multi-stakeholder model, or ESG, environmental, social, and governance, tend to have done better and are more resilient, and I believe also come out better out of this crisis. They've had a higher performance. Not surprisingly, the financial market has woken up. Even during the pandemic, ESG funds have grown. More people have put their money there. The returns have been better for about 90% of these funds. And this, I think, has created an acceleration of an understanding of what needs to be done, but also more and more companies moving to this longer-term multi-stakeholder model. And that's only to the benefit of society, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to pick up on that point, actually, because that question of how do you have a stakeholder-centric, purpose-driven mindset, we feel, and from the work that we've done, has to be one of the central planks that underpins the whole reset of the economy. So I'd love to hear from you any reflections on what does it really mean to adopt that kind of mindset? Are there any recommendations you would give to people? And, you know, from an investor or from others, how can they really scrutinize companies and know that that is something that they've really cemented in how they approach decision?
Well, we're finally discovering that we cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. And the two most burning issues that are well captured in the Sustainable Development Goals, I would say, is climate change and inequality. And increasingly, we see obviously people thinking about how do we decarbonize our global economy? How do we move to a regenerative economy? How do we ensure that our growth is more inclusive? And how do we create the space to do that, especially by moving the financial market to the longer term? Now, increasingly, the financial market understands the risks that there are built into company operating models, not only in scope 1 and 2, which is under your own control, but more importantly, often a bigger risk in your total impact in your value chain or your total impact to society. Unfortunately, although there is an enormous need for measurements of the environmental and social impacts that any of the business models have next to the financial, we just don't have a standard that is comparable, measurable. The materiality is difficult to see. We have currently in the world about 660 different standards on ESG by over 160 different standard setting bodies. And the Accounting for Sustainability obviously has played a key role in creating awareness. With the CFO statement, we've obviously seen a lot of CEOs getting together on climate, for example, with the net zero to stay below 1.5 degrees. We've also seen a call to action on the accounting bodies to do their role with a code of conduct. So you've played an important role of increasing the awareness about the need to measure environmental and social capital. What we now need to do is put this in practice. In the decade of action, the art of the possible, we now need to take these thousands of flowers that have bloomed and ideas that people have worked on and make them into a beautiful bouquet. The farthest along we are already on climate change with the TCFD, the Task Force for Financial Disclosure, which is increasingly being looked at by many jurisdictions around the world to be put into law. In fact, New Zealand was the first one to do this. But not surprisingly, we also see a strong demand, especially from the financial community, to publish more data also on the social side, and not to forget the very important governance side. And increasingly, the financial community has discovered that exposure doesn't only allow them to compare companies within a sector, to look at risks that a company might be exposed to, but more importantly, increasingly also identify the opportunities that are associated with that. Companies that internalize many of these externalities like climate change or social inequality, human rights standards in their value chain, and so forth, are companies that tend to be better run, that are more aware of what is happening in the world, and with their products and innovations better cater to the needs that the world has, and profitably are able to address these issues of people and planet. They have a more engaged workforce, they are a better employer brand, and obviously a stronger corporate reputation. And we are increasingly able to put values around this and then be hopefully in a better position to channel capital and to stimulate this conversion to the future. One of the biggest challenges that we have coming out of COVID will be the need for job creation, and part of the new social contract that we need to work on. According to the ILO, 500 million equivalent working hours have been lost, 100 million people put back into poverty. We've probably lost 10 to 15 years on the sustainable development agenda. And that is obviously very sad, and we cannot afford to do that. And what is very, very important is that we ensure that what we will build back is, first of all, sustainable and obviously foolproof, if you want to, for future generations as well, but is also equitable. And job creation will be very important, especially amongst the young, if we want to avoid the issues of lack of social cohesion. I think the challenges of us not having addressed these issues of inequality have led to a lot of the populism that we now see at national levels, or the nationalism or xenophobia that came to it. So job creation. And it happens to be that greening cities, retrofitting buildings, electrifying our mobility system, restoring our natural capital, investing without any doubt in R&D and education are all things that make our future more resilient, but also create better paying jobs, better jobs, more jobs, and more resilient jobs. So that's the direction we need to go. And frankly, we don't have a choice. We really have to now focus not anymore on the direction that most people understand, but we have to focus on the speed and scale of implementation.
One of the things that helps with that speed of implementation is setting ambitious targets. And you touched a little bit on that. You touched on net zero. You touched on some of the other trends where people really need to be setting those targets. One thing we're starting to see is people discussing setting, net positive for nature targets. Can you say a little bit more about how the kind of targets people need to set, also in some of those social areas, and really then how targets can help to mobilize the kind of action you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. See, I would even argue that if we don't set targets that make us feel uncomfortable, they're probably not aggressive enough. And we are at the point now that we need to set absolute zero targets if you want to, and I'll get into that in a minute. Earth's Overshoot Day this year was August 22nd, which means that every day after August 22nd, we actually use more resources than this world can replenish. Or put it in other words, we're actually stealing from future generations. Many people talk about the need for a circular economy, but we actually need to start much more thinking about a regenerative economy. And that's probably true and best expressed in agriculture. Right now, a problem, 15 to 20% of the climate change issues are coming from an unsustainable way of producing food, if you want to. Deforestation, food waste, big symptoms of that. And we have to turn that into a positive contribution to solving climate change by moving to regenerative agriculture. By the way, also resulting in increasing livelihoods for smallholder farmers who still today are counted amongst the people that most live in poverty. And so creating a carbon market and paying them for protection of nature-based services would, for example, be a good thing. What does it require? When we've lost 68% of our species over the last 5 decades, and we're seeing 1 million more species at risk of being extinct at the current rate that we're going, it requires us to set targets to restore biodiversity. Not only a net zero loss, but actually a positive contribution to regenerate. On climate change, I would argue, as a minimum, we would need to set a target of being net zero by 2050, which means staying below the 1.5 degrees. And it's by all means possible. But it will be challenging for some parts of our global economy, which means that most countries, most companies also have to set targets that should be met to that level in 2030, 2035, or 2040. And more people are doing this. I think a big signal came from governments themselves. China setting a net zero target for 2060 is a good first step. They'll undoubtedly put it forward. We've seen Europe with the Green Deal setting a target for 2050 of net zero and a very aggressive 55% reduction for 2030. We have now Japan has followed, South Korea, the UK, and the list goes on. So with the US now changing the presidency, we can also see them re-entering the global state. So I think you'll see momentum. So companies first and foremost need to set a target of being net positive. Restoring, repairing, contributing is the mindset. And then when it gets to climate change or poverty, as a social example, you need to set net zero targets. Anything short is simply not good enough anymore. Even if you don't have all the answers, don't worry about that. Many of the things you can do alone, but increasingly we also need to look at partnerships. And the good thing coming out of COVID perhaps is that we've seen an acceleration of these partnerships. We understand that companies cannot do everything immediately. So you'll have a glide path as you integrate it into your strategies and roll your boards, put the measurements in place, get your value chain partners or your industry partners aligned. That is all hard work and take a certain time frame for that, 5 or 10 years. But increasingly also, we need to form the bigger partnerships with civil society, with the academic community, with governments ultimately to move it forward. Now, we are seeing a big help coming in, and that is from the accounting profession. It has taken a while, admittedly, but as we talk about action and what is possible, we now see the accounting profession waking up. We have for the first time the A4S Foundation that has come up with a proposal for the Sustainable Standards Boards. This would be next to the IASB, the International Accounting Standards Board. International Accounting Standards Board focusing much more on the financial measures of materiality, but the Sustainable Standard Board will focus on the environmental and social measures that we need, and have currently a consultation that is out there. And I would encourage everybody to actively not only participate in that consultation, but also advocate that we implement as soon as we can some of these broader measures. Often it is said that accountants will change the world. I truly believe that. I truly believe right now, where we only measure financial capital, we optimize obviously that, and some people are very good at it. But if we could only also include the environmental and social capital, we would certainly drive a different behavior and a different outcome. One of the most important systems changes that you can do. And it is good to see that organizations like the CDP or CDSB, Accounting for Sustainability, IIRC, or SASB and others are now getting together to see if we can create this united voice to move our measurement system forward. After all, we treasure what we measure, and human, social, and environmental capital is an absolutely crucial part of creating this more sustainable and inclusive world that we live in.
Absolutely. And the final day of the summit, Friday, is going to be dedicated to reporting. So we'll be speaking to a lot of those key players, and I think that is the message that really is coming across, that collaboration with the standard setters and that direction of travel of a single global set of standards harmonized. We'll see how long it takes to get there, but time is definitely not on our sides.
It's not easy, and it's fair to point that out, but I think if there is a common understanding of the needs, which there is right now, and we put the interest of the common good ahead of our own interest, I think we can really reasonably do that in the next 3 to 5 years. Even the Fed in the US, the SEC is now changing the tune quite rapidly after the elections. So I think you'll see some momentum from the Financial Accounting Standard Board as well, I would say. So this is the moment that we need to seize it and put all of our energy collectively behind that. Absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and I would also say, don't wait until the standards, there's perfectly good standards and information to be drawing on for decisions now. It'll only get better over time, so not to wait. You picked up on one other thing there that we've really seen coming through strongly, and again is one of the areas that I think needs to underpin this moment of reset and recovery, and that's collaboration. Given the scale of the challenge, we'll only achieve success if we have that collaboration, and whether that's around reporting standards or across industry, between governments, investors, and others. One final area that we've really seen as a lesson from the pandemic, and something that a lot of businesses have said to us that they really felt that it showed some of the gaps in their current approaches, and something that they really felt they needed to look at going forward. And that's, how do you really grapple with a lot of the uncertainty that there is in terms of how these trends will manifest, whether it's being in the right place to take advantage of the opportunities, or risks, and how those risks are so interconnected, and And so things like scenario analysis and being on the front foot. Can you say a little bit more about how you think companies and investors and others from across the finance world can really take those lessons and be in a good position given how much uncertainty there is?
No, sure. This is a very volatile, uncertain, and complex and ambiguous environment that we are in. And it is not easy to be a CEO, and it's not easy to predict. Although some things we can predict: the acceleration of the trend of technology and its implications, a bigger role of governments, a difficult situation of global governance, as many of the institutions don't work and will take a while to repair, but also very clearly that we have to deal with these planetary challenges. Ebola is not the black swan. COVID is not the black swan. We've had Ebola, we've had SARS, we had Zika. In fact, our inability to act and act together is probably the black swan. And that is what we need to address. But there is a certain level of predictability of the future that we should start to internalize. It means for companies itself to put purpose firmly in the middle of their business models, to operate on the long-term multi-stakeholder model, to look at the environmental and social capital as much as the financial capital, to be especially mindful of your human capital in the organization. And many of the things I think you can do alone, but at the end of the day, companies are held to higher standards than they perhaps can deliver. Not any single company can move to regenerative agriculture or get rid of the plastics in the oceans. You do need these broader partnerships, and ultimately, you also will need to work with governments to ensure that the right frameworks are in place. The Prince of Wales is a wonderful example of leading partnerships. In fact, I would argue that anything he does starts from a firm position of using his convening power to bring the right people together. The Sustainable Market Initiative is another example of that right now, where under his patronage, may I say, and leadership once more, we're looking at bringing all the key players in the value chain together in agriculture to see if we can drastically and practically change and move to a carbon positive, regenerative, more socially equitable system that can not only feed the 9-10 billion people in the world, but do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. So as it gets to these partnerships, what is very important is shared objectives, clear understanding what everybody contributes to these partnerships, holding each other to account, a high level of transparency, feedback loops. All these things are very important. And then, being humble about it. It's very difficult, I think, for people to work in partnerships other than their controlled sphere of influence. It requires different skills. But now more than ever do we need these skills to get to these broader systems changes. Just trying to make the changes that we now have incrementally or with a mindset of playing not to lose within our current systems is not giving us these results anymore. So at the end of the day, it boils down to leadership, moral leadership. It boils down to courage, which ultimately comes from the French word cœur, which means with the heart as well as with the brain. So we need to bring, I say always, bring humanity back to business, create the leaders that are purpose-driven, understand these partnerships, can indeed be systemic thinkers, and above all, understand the power of keeping a longer-term multi-generational mindset in all they do. And we're short of those leaders, but I think that we can quite rapidly cultivate them and create the environment for those leaders to blossom. And these are the leaders that companies are looking for. These are the leaders that will be successful. And above all, those are the leaders that others would want to follow.
Fantastic. And I think that really helps to also create a vision of what a sustainable recovery, a sustainable future could look like. I'd like to close with one final question to you. And maybe this is one that touches more on the core, the heart, than the mind. So I'd really love to hear from you what gives you hope and inspiration for the future.
Well, I've always said I'm a prisoner of hope because I see at the end of the day, I see the young people especially being more purpose-driven, being more innovative, understanding technology, the power of partnerships, having a very open and positive mind of what this world could look like and seeing the possibilities actually to put that in practice. Yesterday, I talked to a broad group of social entrepreneurs that mainly young people that are coming up with incredibly creative solutions. So if we not only invite the young people to the table, but in more and more cases actually give them the table, that would give me hope. The second thing is another reason why I'm hopeful, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we're at the point now, because we haven't acted early, that the cost of not acting is actually higher than the cost of acting. Even if you don't believe in the morality of the thing, the economic forces drive you there. If you still believe that you should maximize shareholder return, it now leads you to running your company responsibly on an environmental and social platform as much as a financial platform to get these higher returns over the long term. So cost of action, inaction. And nowhere has that been clearer than with COVID. We've spent about $12 trillion just to stabilize the global economies. Martin Wolf was writing in the Financial Times that it might cost us $60, $70 trillion if you look at the cumulative value that is being lost. Well, implementing these sustainable development goals only costs you an incremental $2 to $3 trillion. The cost of inaction is far higher now than the cost of action. So that gives me hope. And the third thing that gives me hope is what I've seen the citizens of this world ask for and do. There's an incredible groundswell now of people from all parts of society that haven't only risen to the challenge with COVID to save their lives and have been truly heroic, but they are all ready to play part in this bigger transformation that we all want to see, to create this world that is more inclusive, more equitable, more sustainable now and for generations to come.
Fantastic. Well, I think that moment of inspiration, you've certainly, I think, inspired everyone listening today to think about the kind of actions and to have some really clear ideas of what they can do. So thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks for the opportunity and good luck to everybody. And most importantly, thanks for what you're doing and be safe. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Paul. And so to conclude the session today, I would just like to thank our speakers once again, Paul Pullman, who you've just heard from, and Mark Hawkins, CFO of Salesforce. Over the rest of this week, we're going to be digging into each of these different action areas and sharing insights, examples that you can take away. And I hope that you'll share some of your own experience with us as well. So I'll look forward to joining you again tomorrow, and do have a look at all of the partner sessions. Do connect with each other on the online platform. I'll look forward to speaking soon.